The warm afternoon sun cast long shadows across the garden as Maria sat on the old wooden bench, her fingers tracing the edges of a photo frame. In the picture, her son Miguel smiled back at her, his eyes bright with hope for the future. He had just turned 28 last spring. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying with it memories of laughter that once filled their small home. Maria remembered how proud she had been when Miguel got accepted to medical school. He was the first in their family to become a doctor. All those late nights studying, all those sacrifices they had both made, had finally paid off. Miguel had been just weeks away from starting his hospital residency. He had been so excited to finally put his years of learning into practice, to finally help people the way he had always dreamed of doing. "You should have seen him," Maria often told her sister on the phone. When he talked about becoming a doctor, his whole face would light up. He was born to heal people. That's what made losing him so cruel. Someone who had dedicated his life to saving others was gone in an instant. It happened during what should have been a fun weekend with friends. Miguel and 4 of his classmates had decided to celebrate the end of their studies with a hiking trip in the mountains. They had planned everything carefully, packed all the right gear, checked the weather forecasts, followed the marked trails. But nature can be unpredictable. The path along the cliff edge had looked stable enough, according to Miguel's friends. They had all crossed it safely, but when it was Miguel's turn, a section of the path simply gave way beneath his feet. One moment he was there, smiling and taking photos of the view, and the next he was gone. Despite the frantic rescue attempts, it was too late. The fall had been too severe. The funeral took place 3 days later. Maria could barely remember most of it. Everything had happened in a blur of tears and hugs and well-meaning words that somehow made the pain worse instead of better. Nearly 300 people had come to say goodbye. Miguel had touched so many lives in his short time. His medical school professors spoke of his brilliance, his childhood friends shared stories that made people laugh through their tears, and his elderly neighbors talked about how he always found time to help them with their groceries or medication. "Your son was special," people kept telling Maria. He would have been an amazing doctor. When it came time to lower the casket into the ground, Maria felt as if her own heart was being buried. Her sister had to hold her up as she watched the dark wood box disappear into the earth. She had thrown a single white rose onto the casket, Miguel's favorite flower since he was a little boy. He used to pick them from their neighbor's garden and get into trouble for it. That night, after everyone had gone home and the house fell silent, Maria sat alone in Miguel's room. Nothing had been moved since the day he left for his hiking trip. His medical textbooks were still stacked neatly on the desk. His white coat hung on the back of the door, ready for his first day at the hospital. She picked up his pillow and held it close, hoping to catch some lingering scent of her son. What Maria didn't know then was that this was just the beginning of a strange journey. She didn't know that in the coming months, her grief would be mixed with confusion, fear, and eventually a determination to uncover the truth about what really happened to her son. That night, as she finally fell into an exhausted sleep on Miguel's bed, Maria had the first of what would become many disturbing dreams. In it, Miguel stood at the foot of the bed, his face serious, trying to tell her something important. She strained to hear his words, but no sound came out. When she woke up the next morning, she dismissed it as nothing more than her mind's way of processing her overwhelming loss. She had no way of knowing that her son was trying to reach her from beyond the grave, and that his message would change everything she thought she knew about his death. The first dream came just 3 nights after the funeral. Marina woke up at exactly 3:17 a.m., her heart pounding like a drum. She could have sworn Miguel had been standing at the foot of her bed, his mouth moving urgently, trying to tell her something. The dream had felt so real that she turned on every light in the house and checked all the rooms before finally accepting that she was alone. "It's just grief," her sister Lucia told her over coffee the next morning. "Your mind is playing tricks on you. It happened to me when I lost Roberto. For months I thought I heard his voice calling me from the garage." Maria nodded, but deep down she wasn't convinced. This didn't feel like a trick of the mind. There had been something almost desperate in the way Miguel looked at her in the dream, like he needed her help. The dreams continued night after night. Sometimes Miguel would appear in his white doctor's coat, other times in the blue hoodie he had been wearing when they found him. He always looked the same, worried, urgent, trying to speak words she couldn't hear. Maria started keeping a dream journal by her bed, scribbling down every detail she could remember when she woke up. "He's always pointing," she wrote one night. "Pointing at something behind me, but when I turn around, I can't see what it is." After 2 weeks of broken sleep, dark circles formed under Maria's eyes. Her friends started to worry. "Maybe you should talk to someone," her neighbor Mrs. Chen suggested, pressing a business card for a grief counselor into Maria's hand. "This isn't healthy, the way you're obsessing over these dreams." But Maria couldn't stop thinking about them, especially when they started getting more intense. One night, she dreamed that Miguel was sitting on the edge of her bed, his hand reaching out to touch her shoulder. The sensation felt so real that when Maria jerked awake, her shoulder still felt cold where his fingers had been. She sat up and gasped. The indent of someone sitting remained on the edge of her mattress, and it slowly rose back to normal as she watched. After that night, strange things began happening around the house. The TV would turn on by itself, always to the medical channel Miguel used to watch. The lights in his bedroom would flicker at random times. Once, Maria found his favorite medical textbook open on the kitchen table, even though she was certain she had left it on his desk. "I'm not crazy," she insisted when Lucia suggested she might need more than just grief counseling. "Something is happening here. Miguel is trying to tell me something." Most people in town started avoiding Maria. They whispered that grief had driven her mad, that she was making up stories to cope with her loss. Only her elderly neighbor Mr. Patel seemed to take her seriously. "When my father died back in my country," he told her one evening as they sat on her porch, "my mother had dreams like yours." She said he couldn't rest because something was unfinished. In the end, she was right. Those words gave Maria comfort. She wasn't alone in experiencing this. Maybe she wasn't losing her mind after all. Then came the dream that changed everything. Almost 3 months after Miguel's death, Maria had the most vivid dream yet. In it, Miguel stood by his grave, pointing down at the earth. This time, she could almost hear his words, like they were being whispered from a great distance. "Not right," the whisper said. "What's in there is not right." Maria woke up drenched in sweat, her whole body trembling. For the first time, she had heard her son's voice in the dream. And what he said chilled her to the bone. That morning, she did something she hadn't done since the funeral. She drove to the cemetery and stood looking down at Miguel's grave. The headstone was simple: Miguel Gonzalez, beloved son, doctor, friend. Forever in our hearts. Fresh flowers had been placed there recently, probably by his medical school friends who still visited regularly. As Maria stood there, a cold breeze suddenly swept through the cemetery, unusual for such a warm day. The flowers on Miguel's grave trembled, and one fell over onto the earth. Maria bent down to fix it and froze. There, in the dirt beside the tombstone, someone had scratched a single word: help. Maria looked around wildly, but the cemetery was empty. Yet she knew with absolute certainty that her son was trying to reach out to her. And whatever he needed to tell her, it couldn't wait much longer. Maria tried to forget what she had seen at the cemetery, but the word help scratched into the dirt haunted her thoughts. Was she truly losing her mind? Or was Miguel somehow reaching out to her? The question swirled in her head as autumn turned to winter, and the dreams continued to disturb her sleep. Then came the day that changed everything. It was nearly 11 months after Miguel's death. The house felt especially empty that morning as Maria sorted through some old boxes in the living room. She had finally decided to pack away some of Miguel's things, not to forget him, but to try to move forward, as her friends had been gently suggesting. She found his old baseball glove from when he was 12, some science fair ribbons, and a stack of birthday cards she had saved over the years. Each item brought back a flood of memories that made her eyes well up with tears. Then she came across his old phone charger, tangled up with some earbuds. I should throw this away, she thought, but something stopped her. Instead, she went to the drawer where she had put Miguel's phone after the accident. The police had returned his belongings in a plastic bag: wallet, keys, watch, and phone. She hadn't been able to look at them since that terrible day. Maria plugged in the phone and waited. The battery had died long ago, and she wasn't even sure it would turn on. After a few minutes, the screen lit up with Miguel's smiling face, a selfie he had taken on a beach trip the summer before he died. Her hands trembled as she unlocked the phone. She knew his password. It was her birthday. As she scrolled through his photos, messages, and notes, it felt like having a little piece of him back. There were pictures of his friends, funny videos they had made together, reminders for exams, and draft emails about job applications. Then she noticed something odd. There was a voicemail that hadn't been played yet. Miguel had received it the day before his accident but never listened to it. Maria pressed play, curious. It was from Dr. Peterson, one of Miguel's professors. "Miguel, call me back as soon as you get this. The files you sent me, this is serious stuff. We need to talk before you do anything with this information. Some powerful people could get very upset. Be careful." Maria frowned. What files? What information? None of this made sense. She checked Miguel's sent emails but found nothing addressed to Dr. Peterson in the days before his death. Then she remembered something else, an old voice message that she herself had received from Miguel the day before his accident. At the time, she had been so overwhelmed with grief that she hadn't thought much about it. Now, she frantically searched through her own phone until she found it. "Hey Mom," Miguel's voice filled the room, and Maria's heart clenched at the sound. "Just checking in. The weather is perfect for hiking tomorrow. Listen, I need to tell you something important when I get back. It's about the family heirloom. Don't let anyone take it before I return." Maria played the message 3 times, confused. Family heirloom? They didn't have anything valuable enough to be called an heirloom. Just some old photographs, her grandmother's recipe book, and Then it hit her. The flash drive. Years ago, Maria had given Miguel a flash drive shaped like a small silver key. It had been a gift from her father to her, and she had passed it on to Miguel when he started medical school, telling him jokingly that it was the key to his future. They had laughed about the cheesy sentiment, but Miguel had treasured it, always keeping it on his keychain. But when the police returned his belongings, the flash drive hadn't been among them. At the time, Maria hadn't noticed. There had been too much else to think about. But now, looking at his keys lying in the drawer, she saw that the little silver key was missing. Maria sat back, her mind racing. The mysterious voicemail from Dr. Peterson, Miguel's message about an heirloom, the missing flash drive, the dreams, the word help at the cemetery. For the first time, she allowed herself to consider a terrible possibility. What if Miguel's death hadn't been an accident? She picked up her phone with shaking hands and dialed Dr. Peterson's number. She needed answers, and she needed them now. As the phone rang, Maria looked at the framed photo of Miguel on the wall. "I hear you, son," she whispered. "I'm going to find out what happened to you. I promise." Dr. Peterson never answered Maria's call. She tried again and again over the next few days, but it always went straight to voicemail. On the 5th day, she decided to visit his office at the medical school. The campus was beautiful in the early spring sunshine. Students hurried between buildings, carrying heavy textbooks and laptop bags. Maria felt a pang in her heart, thinking how Miguel should have been among them. She found her way to the Department of Medicine and asked the front desk clerk about Dr. Peterson. "Oh," the young man said, looking uncomfortable. "Dr. Peterson isn't with us anymore. He left quite suddenly about 10 months ago. Family emergency," they said. 10 months ago, right after Miguel died. "Is there a forwarding address? A phone number?" "It's very important that I speak with him," Maria pressed. The clerk shook his head. "I'm sorry, but no. He just disappeared. Didn't even clean out his office. The university had to pack up his things." This wasn't making sense. A respected doctor doesn't just vanish without a trace. Something was wrong here, and Maria was more convinced than ever that it had something to do with Miguel's death. Leaving the campus, Maria didn't know where to turn next. She drove aimlessly, eventually finding herself at the community center where she had once taken Miguel for swimming lessons when he was a little boy. A sign caught her eye. Grief Support Group, Tuesdays, 7 p.m. Maria had avoided support groups, preferring to deal with her grief privately. But now, desperate for any help or insight, she decided to attend that evening's meeting. The room was set up with chairs in a circle. About 12 people sat quietly, nodding as an older woman spoke about losing her husband. Maria took an empty seat and listened. One by one, people shared their stories of loss. Some cried, others spoke matter-of-factly about their pain. Maria felt a strange comfort in this circle of strangers who understood grief in a way others couldn't. When her turn came, Maria hesitated, then told them about Miguel and the hiking accident. She didn't mention the dreams or her suspicions. It seemed too strange to share with people she had just met. After the meeting ended, as people were having coffee and cookies, an elderly man approached her. He was tall and thin, with silver hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "My name is Eduardo," he said softly. "I couldn't help but notice something about you while you were speaking. There's an unusual energy around you, a connection to the other side." Maria stared at him. "What do you mean?" Eduardo glanced around to make sure no one was listening. "I have certain abilities," he explained. "Some people call it being psychic, but I prefer to think of it as being sensitive to things others can't see or hear." Under normal circumstances, Marina might have politely excused herself. She had never believed in psychics or mediums. But these weren't normal circumstances, and she was desperate for answers. "Could we talk somewhere private?" she asked. They sat in Maria's car in the parking lot. Eduardo closed his eyes for a moment, his breathing slow and deep. "Your son," he said suddenly, his eyes still closed. "He was a healer, a doctor." Maria's heart raced. She hadn't mentioned Miguel's profession during the meeting. He had dark hair, a small scar on his left elbow. He laughed easily. He played baseball as a child but preferred books as he got older. Tears filled Maria's eyes. Everything Eduardo said was true. Then Eduardo frowned, his face tightening. "He's trying to communicate something important. He says he's not at peace." Maria leaned forward. "What else? Please, what else does he say?" Eduardo's eyes opened, and Maria was startled by the intensity in them. "There's something in the grave that doesn't belong there, and something missing that does. He keeps showing me a key, a silver key." Maria gasped. "The flash drive, it was shaped like a key." "Whatever was on that drive," Eduardo said gravely, "may be why your son isn't at rest." And he hesitated. "And what?" Maria pressed. "And it might be why he died. I sense that your son's death wasn't what it seemed. There's darkness around it. Danger." Eduardo touched Maria's hand gently. "Be careful who you trust with this. The people involved in what happened to your son, they're powerful and they're still out there." As she drove home that night, Maria felt both frightened and strangely empowered. For the first time since Miguel's death, she was certain of one thing. She needed to find out what was on that flash drive. And to do that, she might have to do the unthinkable, ask to have her son's grave opened. That night, Maria couldn't sleep. Eduardo's words kept echoing in her mind. "There's something in the grave that doesn't belong there, and something missing that does." She tossed and turned, wrestling with the unthinkable idea of asking to have Miguel's grave opened. Around 3 a.m., exhausted but wide awake, she went to the kitchen and made a cup of tea. The house was quiet except for the ticking of the old clock that had belonged to her grandmother. As she sat at the kitchen table, she noticed Miguel's medical ethics textbook on the counter. She didn't remember leaving it there. The book was open to a chapter titled "The Duty to Report." A sentence was underlined in pencil. "A doctor's first responsibility is to protect patients from harm, even when doing so involves personal risk." Maria touched the underlined sentence with trembling fingers. Was this another sign? Or was her tired mind seeing connections that weren't there? The next morning, Maria called her sister Lucia. "You want to do what?" Lucia's voice rose in shock when Maria explained her thoughts. "Dig up Miguel's grave? Have you lost your mind completely?" "I know how it sounds," Maria said, "but something isn't right about his death. I can feel it, Lucia." "This has gone too far," Lucia said firmly. "First the dreams, then the signs, now this psychic person filling your head with nonsense. You need help, real help. Professional help. You don't understand." "No, you don't understand. This isn't healthy. Miguel is gone. Nothing you do will bring him back. You need to accept that and start healing." After hanging up, Maria felt more alone than ever. Her own sister thought she was crazy. Maybe she was right. Maybe this was all just elaborate wishful thinking, a grieving mother's desperate attempt to deny the reality of her son's death. But then the dreams came again that night, more vivid than ever. This time, Miguel stood by his grave, pointing urgently at the earth. "Mom," he said clearly, the first time she had heard his voice so distinctly in a dream, "please help me. The truth needs to come out." Maria woke up with tears streaming down her face and a deep certainty in her heart. Crazy or not, she had to try. She owed it to her son. The next morning, she made an appointment with a lawyer named Mrs. Rivera, who specialized in unusual legal matters. The office was small but neat, with diplomas covering one wall and family photos on the desk. "Let me make sure I understand," Mrs. Rivera said after Maria explained her situation. "You want a petition for an exhumation of your son's body based on dreams and a psychic's reading?" When she put it that way, it did sound ridiculous. Maria felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment. "There's more," she said, pulling out her phone. "This voice message from my son's professor, who disappeared right after Miguel died. And this message from Miguel himself, talking about something important he needed to tell me." Mrs. Rivera listened to both messages, her expression thoughtful. "It's not much," she admitted. "But there might be another angle. You mentioned your son was found after a hiking accident." Maria nodded. "Was there a thorough investigation? An autopsy?" "There was an autopsy," Maria said. "The report said he died from injuries consistent with a fall." "Could I see that report?" Maria had a copy at home. She had read it once, painfully, then put it away, unable to bear the clinical description of her son's broken body. "The thing is," Mrs. Rivera explained, "if we can find any inconsistencies in the autopsy report, that might be grounds for an exhumation. It's a long shot, but it's more legally sound than dreams or psychic readings." Maria felt a spark of hope. "So you'll help me?" Mrs. Rivera tapped her pen against her desk, considering. "It won't be easy. The courts don't grant exhumations lightly. It's expensive, emotionally draining, and the odds are against us. Even if we succeed, you might not find what you're looking for." "I understand." "And there's something else to consider," Mrs. Rivera added, her voice softening. "If your suspicions are correct, if there was foul play involved in your son's death, you might be stirring up a hornet's nest. Powerful people don't like their secrets exposed. Are you prepared for what might come of this?" Maria thought of Miguel, how brave he had been, how committed to doing the right thing. She thought of his underlined sentence in the ethics book. A doctor's first responsibility is to protect patients from harm, even when doing so involves personal risk. "Yes," she said firmly, "I'm prepared." Mrs. Rivera nodded, a new respect in her eyes. "Then let's get started." The legal battle took longer than Maria expected. Weeks turned into months as they filed paperwork, attended hearings, and faced setback after setback. Most officials looked at her with a mixture of pity and discomfort. No one wanted to disturb a grave based on what they saw as a grieving mother's delusions. "They think I'm crazy," Marina said to Mrs. Rivera after another disappointing day in court. "They don't understand," Mrs. Rivera replied gently. "But we're making progress. The inconsistencies we found in the autopsy report are real. That head injury doesn't match with the type of fall described in the accident report." They had discovered several odd details when examining the documents more carefully. The autopsy mentioned bruising patterns that weren't typical of a hiking fall. There was also a strange note about possible defensive wounds on Miguel's hands that hadn't been fully investigated. "Why didn't they look into this more carefully at the time?" Maria had asked. "Sometimes things get overlooked," Mrs. Rivera explained, "especially when everything seems to point to an accident. No one wants to create extra work or upset a grieving family with unnecessary questions." Finally, almost exactly 1 year after Miguel's death, a sympathetic judge granted the exhumation order. Judge Alvarez had lost his own son years earlier and seemed moved by Maria's unwavering conviction. "This is highly unusual," he said as he signed the papers. "But I believe a mother deserves answers if there are legitimate questions about her child's death." The exhumation was scheduled for the following Tuesday. As the day approached, Maria barely slept. The dreams of Miguel had stopped completely, as if he knew his message had finally been received. Dawn broke cold and misty on the day of the exhumation. Maria arrived at the cemetery early, wrapped in her warmest coat. Mrs. Rivera stood beside her, a steadying presence. Several officials were already there, the medical examiner, police representatives, and cemetery workers. A white tent had been set up around Miguel's grave for privacy. "Are you sure you want to be here for this?" Mrs. Rivera asked. "You don't have to witness it." "I need to be here," Maria said firmly. "I owe him that." The workers began their grim task. The sound of shovels cutting into earth filled the morning air. Maria watched, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure everyone could hear it. After what seemed like hours, they reached the casket. "Ready?" The chief medical examiner asked Maria. His eyes were kind behind his glasses. He had been one of the few officials who hadn't treated her like she was crazy. Maria nodded, unable to speak. The workers carefully opened the casket lid. Maria had prepared herself for many things, for the shock of seeing her son's remains, for the possibility that her quest had been pointless, even for the chance that the casket might be empty. But nothing had prepared her for what they actually found. Miguel's body was there, preserved by the embalming process and the sealed casket. But there were several things that made everyone present go silent with shock. First, the injuries visible on his body didn't entirely match those described in the original autopsy report. There were marks around his neck that had never been mentioned. Second, the position of his body had been disturbed. Though he had been laid to rest with his hands folded over his chest, his right arm was now bent at an odd angle, as if he had moved after burial. But most shocking of all was what they found clutched in his right hand, something that definitely hadn't been there during the funeral. A small silver flash drive, shaped like a key. "That's it," Maria whispered. "That's the family heirloom he mentioned." How had it gotten there? Who had placed it in Miguel's hand after he was buried? And why? The medical examiner carefully removed the flash drive and placed it in an evidence bag. "We'll need to take the body for a new autopsy," he said, his voice professionally calm despite the extraordinary circumstances. "And this flash drive will need to be examined by experts." As they prepared to transport Miguel's body to the medical examiner's facility, Maria stood silently by the grave. A strange mix of emotions swirled within her: grief, vindication, fear of what might be discovered, but most of all, a sense that she had finally done what her son had been asking of her all this time. "What do you think is on that drive?" Mrs. Rivera asked quietly. "The truth," Maria replied. "Whatever it is, I think it's what got my son killed, and I think someone wanted to make sure it was buried with him forever." The waiting was almost unbearable. After the exhumation, the police took charge of the flash drive, saying they needed special technicians to examine it safely. The new autopsy would take time as well. Maria went home to an empty house filled with questions. That night, for the first time in months, she slept deeply with no dreams of Miguel. It was as if a heavy weight had been lifted from her shoulders. She had done what her son asked, and now she could finally rest. 3 days later, Detective Chen called, asking Maria to come to the police station. Her heart raced as she drove there, unsure whether to feel hopeful or afraid. The detective's office was small and cluttered with files. On his desk sat a laptop and the silver key-shaped flash drive. "Mrs. Gonzalez," he said, his face serious. "What we found on this drive, it changes everything about your son's case." The flash drive contained hundreds of files. Photos, videos, medical records, and personal notes Miguel had been collecting for months before his death. They painted a disturbing picture of what had been happening at the hospital where he was supposed to begin his residency. "Your son discovered that certain doctors were using patients as unwilling test subjects for an experimental treatment," Detective Chen explained, choosing his words carefully. "A treatment that hadn't been approved, that had dangerous side effects. Several patients died, and the deaths were covered up." Maria felt sick, and Miguel found out. He did more than find out. He gathered evidence, meticulously documented everything. Names, dates, medical records, even secret recordings of conversations between the doctors involved. He was building an airtight case to report to the medical board and possibly the FBI. "But they discovered what he was doing," Maria said, the terrible truth dawning on her. Detective Chen nodded grimly. "The night before the hiking trip, your son emailed Dr. Peterson asking for advice. We found that email chain on the drive. Dr. Peterson warned him to be careful, said he would help him report everything properly when he got back." "But he never got back," Maria whispered. "We've reopened the investigation into your son's death," Detective Chen said. The new autopsy confirms what you suspected. The injuries weren't consistent with a simple fall. There were signs of a struggle, and traces of a sedative in his system that wasn't in the original toxicology report. Maria closed her eyes, the pain of knowing Miguel had been murdered mixing with relief that the truth was finally coming out. "How did the flash drive get into his grave?" she asked. "We believe it was Dr. Peterson," the detective said. "After your son's death, he must have realized what had happened. The records show he attended the funeral. He probably slipped the drive into the casket when he paid his respects. Then he disappeared, fearing for his own safety." "Are you going to find these doctors, the ones who did this?" Maria asked. "We already have. 3 arrests were made this morning. Dr. Wallace, the hospital's chief of surgery, Dr. Patel from the research department, and Dr. Torres, who falsified the patient records. They're facing charges of medical malpractice, fraud, and involvement in your son's death." In the weeks that followed, the story exploded across the news. "Brave medical student uncovers deadly hospital experiment," read the headlines. Miguel's face was everywhere, hailed as a hero who gave his life trying to protect patients. The trial was long and difficult. Maria sat through every day of it, listening to the horrible details of how her son had been followed, drugged, and pushed from that cliff to silence him. She watched as, one by one, the doctors were found guilty and sentenced to prison. On the 1-year anniversary of the exhumation, Maria returned to the cemetery. Miguel had been reburied with full honors. His headstone now read, "Miguel Gonzalez, beloved son, guardian of truth. His courage saved countless lives." She placed white roses on his grave, his favorite since childhood. "We did it, Miguel," she said softly. "The truth came out just like you wanted." As she stood there, a warm breeze suddenly swept through the cemetery, rustling the leaves. A single white rose petal detached and floated upward, spiraling into the blue sky. Maria smiled through her tears. Though her heart still ached with loss, she felt a peace she hadn't known since before Miguel's death. The dreams had stopped completely now. Her son had delivered his message, and she had heard him. Justice had been served. As she turned to leave, an older man was standing nearby, watching her. It took her a moment to recognize Dr. Peterson. He looked different, thinner, with a beard and glasses he hadn't worn before. "I knew you would figure it out," he said quietly. "Miguel always said you were the strongest person he knew." "Thank you," Maria said, "for making sure the truth wasn't buried forever." "It was your son who saved those lives," Dr. Peterson replied. "I just helped finish what he started." They walked together out of the cemetery, sharing stories of Miguel, not just how he died, but how he lived. How he had always stood up for what was right, even when it wasn't easy. How even beyond death, he had found a way to complete his mission of protecting the innocent. Some would call it a miracle. Maria simply called it love, a mother's love that had heard her son's plea from beyond the grave, and a son's love that had reached out across the ultimate divide to deliver one final, crucial message.